You are listening to An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast. I'm Peter Stiepelman, and I am joined by my co-host, Jamie Almanzan. So finally, you got to hear Aaron Johnson.
Yeah, we should probably open this podcast with the caveat. I don't know if you've ever opened the podcast with a caveat. Like, Dr. Aaron Johnson is my friend. I love this man. And I feel like I so want to hear what you think about this conversation, because I truly, truly love this man, and I would follow this man wherever he goes. And I believe he cares about people deeply, 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 deeply. And I think it comes out in how he talks. Not always what he talks about, but it is the tone and tenor in which he frames and talks about care for people, particularly students, that makes me say, like, oh, this is great. This is great.
So you know Aaron really well.
Yeah.
I only got to meet him and immediately felt a nice connection to his values and his beliefs and certainly his principles. I'm curious, did you expect to hear the things that you heard? Or I'm not sure how I want to ask the question, but were there any surprises in our conversation?
No surprises. I did find some things he said to be particularly well said. For example, this statement, the way he said this, I thought was so good. When you said, how does the term an imperfect leader resonate with you? And he said, I hate that you have to say it like that because it implies that there is a perfect leader. I've not met one, worked one, or been one myself.
Yeah.
Like, oh, that's exactly. Yeah, it's so good. That was my favorite. Yeah, it does. It does imply that. I never really thought about it that way. Basically, if you put one, you get the other. That dichotomous thinking is such an American identity piece. We think this way. We're stuck it takes a lot for us to shift our minds. And I'm speaking very generally. That's not everybody, but it's definitely an American cultural identity is to think in the binary.
I really appreciated his thought on relationships and building relationships and seeking input. He said something like, I have to go to people and I have to ask them, what do you think about that decision that I made? And I was like, man, if more people did that, better decisions would be made. I should have asked, why do you think people don't do that? And because, it's a fairly obvious answer. They know what they don't want to hear. Right. And they don't want to be told that this isn't the path worth following. And so better just to go and ask for, and apologize than to ask people, what do they think about a decision?
The after-action review was a really interesting one.
Okay, well, that is a perfect way for us to say, let's listen to Aaron's conversation. And let us also remind you, you're listening to An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast. Also, if you enjoy this episode and if you've learned something today, please consider following the show or leaving us a 5-star review. This really does help the podcast more than I can say, and it allows us to reach more and more people. And that would just mean the world to us. So thank you so much. Imperfect leaders. Are you facing challenges filling open speech-language pathologist positions within your district? Kind of a silly question, because I know you are. MPAT Speech understands the critical need for qualified professionals in your schools. They recognize that communication lies at the heart of academic success. And that's why they're dedicated to helping you bridge the gap by offering expert therapists and innovative telehealth solutions. Don't let open positions hinder your students' success. Partner with MPAT Speech today and ensure every child in your district has access to the speech therapy they deserve. MPAT Speech, EMPAT Speech.com. Empowering students, empowering schools. Today on An Imperfect Leader, my guest is Dr. Aaron Johnson, Associate Superintendent in Michigan, Adjunct Professor at Wayne State University, a literacy-focused educational leader dedicated to student success, and the author of A Walk in Their Kicks, Literacy, Identity, and the School of Young Black Males. Aaron, welcome to An Imperfect Leader.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm so thrilled to welcome you. And I believe strongly in human-centered leadership. And as I would define it, human-centered leadership speaks to this sense of belonging. In your book, you provide examples to educators to help them foster positive relationships with all students and specifically engaging African-American males in school-based literacy. And I wonder If we could just jump off right from the beginning and learn more about that, this work is more important than ever. Would you give us some examples of what that looks like in a school setting?
Yes, absolutely. So I wrote this book as a means to give a love letter back to the field of education because it saved my life. It literally saved my life in multiple ways. I took some of the experiences that I had as a teacher, as a director of curriculum and instruction, and as a assistant superintendent for instructional services, and I sort of compiled those things together. And then what the book also represents is that the teachers from the field, what they said about how to improve school environments, what they said about how to improve their classrooms, what they said about leadership. And so when you go through the book, you'll see that almost at the end of every chapter, there are some things that teachers can do right now and that leaders can do right now. When I looked at this question, I said, what a great question, because I'm always asked, okay, what do we do? This part of the work looks different in different contexts, in different areas, in different schools, in different states. And so it's my firm belief that if there's anyone that tells you they have a to-do list that will work in every environment, they're lying to you. They don't, they're not being truthful. And the reason why I say that is I've worked in several different school districts and different schools. Sometimes things don't work in different contexts, but there are things that we can do as educators that I think are the core of what we do, or can be the core of what we do. And there's some common things. It's a beauty and the challenge, I believe, because relationships are fluid. Anyone that gives you a list, like I said, is not telling you the truth. So with that being said, there are things that we can do that I believe the book addresses. First and foremost, we humanize students. We allow them to be 12 years old and 16 years old and actually have an opinion and state what they like and do not like about school, what they let them talk about what they don't like and like about the direction for their future.
You know, can I interrupt for one quick second? Because I imagine
absolutely.
we could also say, when we humanize children, we allow them to tell them what they don't like about us too. As a school administrator, I know that you have seen it too, because you've seen discipline reports, and those two terms, defiance and disrespect, are probably the two that get kids in trouble the most. And particularly when you read, it's like, so the kid said, you're getting on my nerves, right? Yes. You're getting on my nerves. And it's like, oh, I've never been so disrespected in my life. You're out of here, right?
Yeah.
And then sometimes the administrator wants to back their teacher up in such a way that it becomes like a 10-day suspension, which then becomes a death sentence in terms of, you know, particularly if you're talking middle school and high school for, you know, credit attainment and things like that. And so Absolutely. I just heard you say that and I thought to myself, my God, you're getting on my nerves could be such an easy conversation of, okay, like I probably would have said it differently, but it sounds like I'm making you mad. Like, let's both pause for a minute and then let's talk it out. Like, what is it that's getting on your nerves? As
Absolutely.
What did you just say? And it's like, you heard me. And then what did you say? And then you know what? You're not going to talk to me that way. You're out of here. You know,
yeah, absolutely. And I wouldn't be saying this if I wasn't guilty of it myself, because I did it. And my favorite one, I'm being facetious here, but my favorite one is insolence. Like, it was so broad in nature. Like, the child was insolent. They told me they were tired of this classroom, or they told me they were tired of this school, and it's like a prison, and all of those things that go along with teenage emotions and hormones and actually just being a human, being upset.
When we talk about the ways that different children may communicate in different contexts, and so you're getting on my nerves, or I'm sick of this place, it is just regular communication. Absolutely. That is not meant to, like, we used to say when I was a principal, Q-tip, quit taking it personally. Uh-huh. You know, like, because it was always like this, well, I can't believe you said that to me. I can't believe you said that about my classroom. Like, absolutely. Okay, Q-tip. Like, just absolutely. Q-tip for a minute.
Yeah, Lord of the Flies is boring to me too. I understand why you're bullshit.
Yeah, maybe Charlotte's Web every single year may not be the thing that the kid wants to read.
Yes, absolutely.
I think we've developed all the themes in that book. I think we got it.
Absolutely.
That's so funny. So sorry, I interrupted.
No, I love it. That's really relevant to the conversation, because your question was, what can we do? We can listen to the kids. When we want to know how to improve something, when I fly Delta, and almost before we land, they send me a survey. How do we do? They're trying to listen to their customers. They're trying to listen to their constituency. They're trying to listen to get better. But we do the most important job. I would contend we do the most important job in this nation, but we don't listen to the people that we say we're serving. One of the key things we can do is create those spaces. I mean, we can create the space metaphorically, but we can create the space physically in a room or in a part of the school and give them the vehicle and opportunity to voice their concerns and voice what they like and don't like. And not just what they like and don't like, but what does it mean for them? How do they see this connecting to their future?
So let me ask you how you did that, because I imagine there are some leaders who are listening who say, yeah, we do that. We do focus groups and things like that. We bring in the student government. And that's where I usually go, oh, okay. Because who typically makes up your student government? How are you making sure that you're getting a real understanding? How are you harvesting the wisdom of those you serve and getting a real authentic impression about how children are treated and what they think about their learning environment? So
absolutely.
How did you do that?
One of the ways I did it, I always took an opportunity to connect students around literacy. My favorite experience with this was while I was serving as an assistant superintendent, and I did a school-wide book club at one of the schools around The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. And at the time, the superintendent said, "What are you doing? This is not your work." And I said, "This is absolutely my work. If you want me to be responsible for raising literacy scores and raising reading scores, this is absolutely my work. I'm not just going to stand on a perch on a hill and tell people what they should do. I'm going to get down there and get involved with them."
I love it.
One of the things I did was I opened up a book club for every student in the school. And at the time, The Hate You Give was a popular movie, and the students hadn't seen it yet, but we promised them that if they read through the book, we would take them on a field trip to see the movie. So I paid for them to go on a field trip. But we held a month-long book club for The Hate You Give. And so while we read through the text, we also had conversations. How is this similar to this environment? How is this similar to how you connect to each other around race, around socioeconomics, your teachers, each other, society? We gave them that opportunity to really be teenagers and be humans and really express their emotions around things that really matter to them.
You gave him agency.
Absolutely.
You want to know the two books I used to do something similar, although I didn't do it on such a large scale. I did it with just small reading groups.
Sure.
I'm now looking back like, oh man, what if we had done that with a much larger group that was representative of the school? Both Maniac McGee and Monster.
Oh, awesome.
So we mapped out Maniac McGee, and then we asked, how is this similar to our own community in terms of East Side, West Side? It was pretty powerful. I hadn't even thought about it since you said it. Boy, do I wish I had done that as a superintendent, to do a book club with kids.
Oh, it's amazing. It's an amazing feeling, too, when you are outside of the school environment, kind of looking in, and you walk through the school and you go in the classroom. Kids don't know who you are. Like, who's this guy sitting in the class today and that sort of thing, versus actually having a relationship with kids. And I know in some large districts, it's almost impossible to have relationships with kids. And then it's almost impossible to some degree to have relationships with your teachers and with your principals and other leaders. But to walk through a school and have students recognize you or be able to say that person made an impact on my life is just amazing. That they gave me space, they gave me agency. One student said, if we read things like this all the time, I would love reading in school, those sorts of things. The book talks about doing those things, like being very intentional about making space for their human beings are just smaller.
Well, I really appreciate you saying this, because so often they say, well, build relationships. And what I hear you saying is very much a human-centered approach. I'm really glad I also started with that as my question. I went back and forth about which question I wanted to start with. And I thought, let's start with your book, because I think that you really talk about building relationship and establishing a cultural field within a school that says we value you and honor you and want you to help us become better. Because in our communications back and forth, you shared that maybe you have a critical view of education as well. So you have this love letter, and love doesn't mean that love is often complicated. It doesn't say that it's love without fault or without feeling. Right. Love is a complex feeling. And so let me just say, if you're just joining us, our guest today is Dr. Aaron Johnson, Associate Superintendent, Professor at Wayne State University, the author of A Walk in Their Kicks. As I mentioned, when you and I were communicating, you shared this critical view of education, educational leadership, and the ways that systems have perpetuated inequities, especially for Black, Latino, Latina, and other marginalized students. Given your perspective, what do you believe are the first steps that leaders in schools, those who are listening, that they need to take to dismantle these inequitable systems? Huge question, right? And I'm like, hey, if you could just tell us, and and it's just about a 20 to 30 minute podcast, so we'll just get it all done. We'll figure it out. But I think lots of people generally want to do this work. They don't know where to start. The book, Start Where You Are, But Don't Stay There.
Yes, absolutely.
So let's not stay there, but where do you start?
You start with yourself. You do a critical inventory of who you are as a person. What are your likes and dislikes? What is your identity? Some folks walk into schools and don't even understand their own identities. When I first began in education, I was often told, check your identity at the door. Check who you are at the door. You're leaving certain parts of you out. I attempted to do that, but that's not authentic. Yeah, absolutely. And in some cases, schools are run like that with very strict and stringent rules. Many times I've had conversations with educators from across this country. We may not even believe that we have to change, or we have to do something to improve that. We are there to, change kids, and we're pointing at kids that they need to change. They're growing. We're trying to teach them about the world. In any relationship, both people are changed. I can't expect my partner to change. I have to change. I have to do what I believe is right. I have to learn and grow. I have to allow myself to be influenced to some degree. I have to make sure that I'm not so strict in my views that, it's my way or the highway sort of thinking. And particularly when it comes to, in our communication, we talked a little bit about my pessimist view about education. Systems are tough to change. School systems are tough to change, and they weren't built for all kids. I think we should get that out there. They weren't built for all kids. The only way they can change is if individuals change, if individuals see their part in perpetuating systems that might be racist or anti-LGBTQ or anti-women. I've helped to administer some engineering programs where all boys were involved. I'm like, where are the girls? How come we're not intentionally going out and seeking girls to be in this program? There has to be some intentionality about this, and we have to understand what our biases are and do our best to overcome those.
It sounds like you're saying we need to understand who we are, so our identities, and then the conversation shift a little bit in terms of, and then leveraging what we know about our identities to make systematic changes. And so it makes me think of, I learned this from the Water Center for Systems Thinking. They did some work with Peter Senge, really deeply rooted in this. I'll use the iceberg as an example. We see above the water people's behaviors, the way that they act, the decisions they make, and that's what we see. And as you were talking about, we need to first understand who are we, our identities. Then that's at the bottom of this iceberg in terms of our mental models, our beliefs, our principles, our values. And then above that is what I thought you started to talk about in terms of understanding the structure of the system. If we're clear on how the system has been established, so I was in mid-Missouri, a district that was founded right after the end of the Civil War. Who was more likely than not a board member establishing all the rules, principles, and policies for that district that just got updated for 200 years? And yet in a university town that saw itself as incredibly liberal and progressive, and to some degree they were. In other ways, they perpetuated the same sort of inequities in where houses were built, who lived there, the schools, how they were resourced. And when you pushed for change, the system worked really aggressively to get back to that status quo. So I totally agree. We should be really clear on who are we and where we come from and what we believe. Then there's that next step, and that's where I'm going to ask you for additional advice. How do you begin to rethink those structures as well as the patterns of behavior that come out of that, so that when we see things happening, we can directly tie it to, oh, it's that structure that we need to be revisiting. And then it's tied to all these other parts of the system, not just one thing. I'll give an example, which is attendance areas. When you're opening up a new school, who gets involved in attendance areas? That becomes a fight on who I want in that school.
Particularly if the school is brand new and shiny, or they have some program that everybody wants to, an IB program, for example, everybody wants to go to that. And then, we can manipulate the system to have it serve who we want it to serve. There's this mirror in our house that's on the way out, and it shows you the length of your body. And this mirror is particularly flattering. I don't know why. It might be the angle, but it makes me look thin. When I stand in that mirror, it makes me look thin. I'm like, man, I'm looking good today. I'm looking good, and I can go out and go into the world, and this is how I'm presenting myself. But if I go into a different mirror, it may not present such a flattering picture. And so where I choose to look, where I choose to get my information matters. So if I want to change and grow, I have to go to people. I have to ask them, what do you think about that decision that I made? Do you believe it served kids? Did it, as a member of this school community, how did that impact you? How did that impact your work? I had this core group of people, which I called the Pulse group. I measured the pulse of the school community. There were teachers and there were parents and there were students that I would go to and say, what do you think? What do you think about how things are around here? What could I have done better? I loved the responses from students. Some students would say, oh, you're doing a great job, Mr. Johnson. No, really, tell me, how can I make this school better? What can I do? What didn't I see when I made this decision?
I love the story of the mirror as a metaphor for what people typically do. They will seek out the voices of those who agree with them. They will seclude themselves in the same chat rooms and newspapers where they get their information as a way to justify, in some cases, their racist viewpoints.
Oh, 100%. If we surround ourselves with people who think like us, then we're not going to change. It's just not going to happen. You don't know that you're racist unless someone brings that to your attention. One of the biases that I had as a leader, and I didn't realize it until someone said it. Someone said, okay, I want all of the women to stand on this side of the room, and I want all of the men to stand on this side of the room. Men, I want you to talk about the privilege that you have as men. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. I was always concerned about my lack of privilege as an African-American man in a lot of the mostly white spaces. I never considered male privilege that I might have or the positional privilege that I had when it came to dealing with parents, students, or teachers. They might not be honest with me because of who I was.
I participated in a similar type of activity. In this case, there was a fishbowl, inner circle, outer circle, and the inner circle were men of different identities, yet all identified as men. And then the conversation was, let's talk about our privilege as men and that was uncomfortable and so necessary and then there was a switching in terms of what did you hear and what would you want the men in this room to hear and understand. Now, that work was done with a group of people that have been doing work together as a way to develop themselves so that they could then go back and lead their organization. It takes for those who are listening, like, I think what I'll do is I'll just bring everybody together, but I'm like, no, don't do that. There's a lot of work that goes into doing that well. It was some pretty incredible work, though.
Yeah, there's a lot of foundational work that has to be done. When you first asked the question, I started off by saying doing some internal work or doing an internal inventory. One of the things that upsets me most, and you can see the books that I have behind me, upsets me most is when I hear leaders particularly say, I don't read, or I don't study, or I don't research. That ends when you graduate from school. When you go through your leadership program, that ends. I think that's where my learning began, to be honest with you, because at the point where I understood how schools worked from an historical perspective. And that's why I started the book off with history. What are some of the basic components of the history of schooling and how have they led us to where we are today? Because once we understand that, we can understand our place in it. We can understand how schools operate. We can understand the ways that schools disenfranchise African-American people, Latino and Latina youth, women, LGBTQ youth. We can understand that from the historical perspective. And in that way, we can become intentional about overcoming some of those ways that the system operates to disenfranchise those groups.
I imagine that when you enter a room and remind people that Frederick Taylor and his system of efficiency is used to design schools,
Yes.
and how not one of those industries uses Frederick Taylor's model anymore, except for schools and prisons.
Yes. Absolutely. It's funny that one of the school that I was the principal at would often be referred to as a prison. There was some rumor that, the person who designed the school also designed prisons, and I don't know how true that is. But what I was intentional about was to make it feel like an institution of learning. I did that through not only the culture that I tried to establish of being vulnerable, that people say all the time, oh, it's like a big family. Well, there's some very dysfunctional families. So I don't want to make that analogy, so much so that I wanted to establish it as a place of learning. When we learn, we fail, we make mistakes, we forgive one another, we seek out the best answer, we collaborate, and also we humanize each other. We make sure that we are taking care of each other. We make sure that this space feels like it belongs to us. If I were to say one thing about what leaders do or what should they do, they should be very intentional in their actions. What I mean by that is if you want to overcome inequity in a school district or in a building, you have to call it out. You have to recognize and say what those inequities are and then make plans to overcome those. If you just say, oh, we'll teach the kids how to navigate that. Well, kids have been navigating it over the last...
Yeah, they haven't needed your help in doing that.
Not at all.
You said something earlier that an individual has to let others know when they've said something or done something that has perpetuated or created injustice. And the example I would give for myself was originally from New York. We always called the playground the yard. It never even occurred to me not to call it that. And so I kept referring to it as a yard when I was a principal, 98% free or reduced lunch. And it was a parent who said to me, I wonder if you could stop calling it the yard. This is not a prison. That's a playground. And language matters. And I was like, wow, never occurred to me that what I was doing was sending an image in a parent's head about how I valued their child in terms of thinking about them on a yard.
Wow.
On the yard. I was like, oh man. So it can be unintentional, right?
Absolutely.
So you also said that our work is imperfect. I want to ask you a question that I ask everybody, which is, how does the term an imperfect leader resonate for you?
Oh, I love that. I hate that you have to say it because I think that implies that there is a perfect leader. And I've not met one or worked for one or been one myself. But I think that gives us license to make mistakes. I think that gives us license to try new things and to be vulnerable and say, hey, this didn't quite work out. How could I have done this better? And I say that with knowing in the back of my mind that although there are not any perfect leaders, in many cases for people of color or women, we've seen in the last few years, leaders of organizations who were either the leader or maybe second or third in charge, particularly people of color, and they've made one misstep or they've made one mistake or one verbal faux pas and they're fired. But has seemed to be this attack, particularly on leaders of color and particularly on women of color who have earned their right to be in positions, but they're somehow supposed to be perfect in everything they do. What that means for me, and I think that's the beauty of this show, and I think that's the beauty of those who are listening, if you want to take away at least one thing from this, is that you should be making mistakes. Because if you're not making mistakes, that means you're just going with the flow. You're not upsetting anything. You're trying to wait until retirement and you don't want to upset anything. But what that means to me is that kids aren't learning. That means you aren't tackling the tough problems. That means you are not addressing your school community in ways that allows them to take advantage of what schools can offer. I think schools can be phenomenal institutions if we push them to be. And that's where I think when we step into these roles, people believe that we should just do everything right. You come in with a certain skill set and you're just going to make it happen. And that's not the case. It's going to be a rocky road, ups and downs, ebbs and flows. You're going to have some good days and good weeks, and you're going to have some bad days and bad weeks. And so I think what this term gives people license to do is to take the risks that they need to take in order to improve school environments.
And we'll be right back. Hey, district leaders, I know you already know this. In schools worldwide, cell phones are posing real challenges on student engagement and mental well-being, and I want you to meet Yonder, a proud sponsor of An Imperfect Leader. And let me share this story from a visit I made to some schools in Silicon Valley. I asked some kids what they liked about Yonder, and after some funny looks, they shared that actually, with Yonder, teachers don't have to battle with them over phones anymore. In fact, one kid said to me he didn't have to worry anymore about his parents texting him in class, and the kid next to him sort of shoved him and goes, "Texting? My mom used to FaceTime me in class." I want to introduce you to a support system that increases teaching and learning. I want you to discover why 1 million students choose Yonder daily. Minimize distractions, maximize learning potential. To learn more, go to overyonder.com. YONDR.
We're back for segment 2 of An Imperfect Leader called An Imperfect Leadership in After Action. Our guest is Dr. Aaron Johnson, Associate Superintendent, Professor of Wayne State University, and the author of A Walk in Their Kicks. And in this segment, as we do each week, we ask our guests to deconstruct a decision that they made and then what did they learn from it. So, Aaron, what happened?
Well, it was a tough one. And I want to say that my career has been fraught with mistakes, but this particular one was near and dear to my heart. I had been meeting with some folks on my instructional team, and we had come to the decision that we were going to detrack classes. We figured that the best place to start was in middle school, because in high school, there's some level of tracking that occurs. You have AP classes or IB classes, and you have students preparing for higher level courses in college. To some degree, there's some stratification there. But the middle schools are highly segregated in their classrooms. And so we had decided that we're going to detrack classes. And so I unilaterally made a decision that we were going to get rid of honors classes at the middle school. In that way, we would reintegrate the classes. And if parents wanted an honors level designation for their child, then they would do extra work, not be segregated from students. Because what that ended up being was all the white students would be in honors classes and all the black students. And you know.
They want a contract for honors.
Yes.
We'll figure that out.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Did you also experience where if you were in band, then there were certain classes, so parents were signing their kids up for band so that they could also create a track that was preferable for them?
Yes, absolutely. And I don't even know how that anomaly occurs. It's just band, and then that goes along with honors and AP and IB.
Yeah, well, if you're in this band class, you got to take this PE class. And if you're in this PE class, well, then you're on this team.
Absolutely.
For those classes. And then, of course, Absolutely. Oh, man, it frustrated me so much.
And that's one of those things that's ingrained in the system, and parents actually ask for it. They get to ask for it without asking for segregated classes. Oh, I just want my kid in band, or I just want my kid in honors.
Right. I just want my kid to take French. And apparently the French teacher's there at this perfect time.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I heard the word unilateral. So I imagine when I say what got overlooked, that's going to play a role in your response. So what got overlooked?
It was Aaron out there up front saying, this is what we're doing, and no discussion. And that's not even my personality, but I knew that this was going to be a hard decision. And so what got overlooked was going out to the community and having discussions and asking questions and allowing what came from the community to help drive my decision, to help drive the decision of the team. I didn't understand until it came back to bite me. I didn't understand it until there were people organizing in the community to make this go away, that their child should have access to all these classes, and you're just trying to limit my child's college access. And that's not what I was trying to do. But, in any community, you should seek the voices of the community. Whether or not you agree with them or not, you have to seek the voices of the community and give people a chance to add their voice to the decision.
In part one, we talked about how you have done that over your career. I imagine, was that a lesson learned, or this was just an aberration of sort of you were compelled to do something right for kids. And it was that impulse to do that you may have overlooked some other pieces.
It was the impulse to do that. It was something that I was passionate about. We were looking at ways to desegregate our schools. We were looking at ways to give students the opportunity. Struggling students, they need to be in community with students who are doing very well. So we were taking that opportunity.
Yes, for the same reason why it is inappropriate to concentrate poverty, right? It doesn't make sense to put all struggling kids in one classroom. Even if you say, well, we'll have a much smaller classroom. Still, everybody is looking around going, we're struggling.
Absolutely.
In our school district, we realized it was our director of data who looked into our English language arts program at the middle school. We had a program specifically for struggling readers. Instead of getting an elective class, they took an additional reading instruction class. The director of data said, it has not been sitting well with me. First of all, meaning that kids who are already struggling in school, that we may take away from them any opportunity for them to show their intelligence in a different way. So they can't take art, they can't take culinary, they can't take band, they can't take world language because they're getting additional treatment in terms of reading instruction. So that already felt bad. So I wanted to look into it more to say, well, this feels bad, but if the outcome is that kids are reading on grade level by the time they're done, then maybe it's worth it. And so he looked at it and said, it's curious to me that kids who were in this class did worse in reading than kids who were eligible for that class, but whose parents said, no, my kid's going to be in band or some other class. It was just unbelievable to me. To your point, it doesn't make sense to concentrate all struggling kids together, nor does it necessarily mean that it's going to actually create what you would hope it would create.
Yeah, absolutely.
What did you learn about relationships, or what new relationships were formed?
I learned that because I'd had great relationships with people throughout the community, that they gave me a little bit of a pass. Not much, but they gave me a little bit of a pass. I leaned on those relationships that I had built up with them. So it wasn't them coming because ordinarily they would come for your job. They would say, this person needs to be fired, right? But because I had done so much pre-work with people in the community, because I was always, I overlooked, going back to the previous question, I overlooked it because I was so passionate about it. I didn't want anybody to tell me not to do it. But the thing that I learned is that when you are working to constantly build relationships, when you do make a mistake, when you do have a misstep, as long as it's not a huge one, if you have a great relationship with your community members, with your teachers, with your students and parents, you may be given a little bit of a pass.
Yeah. You say pass. Can I change the word to grace?
Yes, absolutely.
Because
absolutely.
It's the way I interpret pass. It's sort of like, okay, I guess it's all right, or it's going to happen.
Yes.
As opposed to my image of grace is, look, there needs to be a mid-course correction. We got to get involved in this discussion with you. We know your heart. We know what you're trying to do.
Yes.
Let's back up and figure this out together.
Yes, absolutely.
And
absolutely.
I really appreciate what you're saying in terms of what you learned about relationship, because I think each week when we have these conversations with leaders around the nation, we ask them, what is something that you did and what you learned from it? And in this case, you're saying, like you said in the first part, you should give yourself permission to make mistakes. And if you've built the relationships, then it's okay. This is just a part of the process of getting to where you hope as a community, you all agree you want to be.
Absolutely. Grace is a fantastic word. Earlier, I said that there's been this assault, particularly on women of color in leadership positions in schools and in higher ed. There's been, in many cases, a lack of grace. Maybe I don't know the whole story, but from the outside looking in, there's been a lack of grace extended to these folks because of political pressure, because of pressure from corporations and things like that. What I learned is that because I did not seek the advice, the voice, the ideas of the community, and because I had some of those same community members that I had great relationships with, maybe if they never met me, they knew me through my newsletter or something like that, could give me that grace and say, maybe he just didn't think about that, or maybe someone told him to do it. We think of these things in our minds because when someone acts out of character that we might believe about who they are, what they do, or what they would do, we offer them that grace because we might say that's not like you. What's going on?
Yeah.
But the flip side of that is it was my character because I was so passionate. I overlooked it to the degree that I didn't want folks telling me not to do it.
Can I ask, did you expect that people would be so opposed and that's why you didn't ask? Or were you surprised that people were so opposed to what you were proposing?
I expected some opposition because at the end of the day, schools operate. I know how communities operate, particularly when it comes to wanting an excellent education for their kids. And there's this push toward, I need my kid in every honors class and every AP class because that's what's going to get them in every sport and every instrument because that's what's going to get them in college.
My first kid versus my third. First kid.
Thanks.
Oh, man.
Absolutely. And then you learn how to be a better leader by how you raise your own kids. But yeah, I had expected some opposition. Like I said, I know how schools operate and how systems operate, and they tend to migrate back to the status quo. I'd like to say that I maybe to some degree lacked the courage to face people down, to give the rationale, to stand on my principles, to stand on the data in front of the community, and then be involved in that dialogue that may have made me change my decision. You know what I mean?
No, I do
don't know if
know
that's
what you
clear.
mean. No, it's incredibly clear. Thank you for your vulnerability, your willingness to really dig deep into your own thought process and decision making. I would possibly add, if I were to empathize, is to also recognize that somewhat impulsive because of a sense of urgency.
Absolutely.
You have an obligation to improve outcomes for kids, and that can be academic outcomes, it can be social emotional outcomes, it can be sense of belonging, it can be any of those pieces. You want children to feel that they belong and that they are achieving, and that their families feel good about the value of public education in their community. If we could dismantle this system, I believe it's going to be great for kids. We don't have time to waste.
Yes, absolutely.
At the same time, your reflection of, and I didn't want someone to tell me no.
Yes.
So we're going to go ahead and move forward. I didn't expect this kind of opposition, or maybe I did, but I didn't think it was going to now potentially delay what I wanted to achieve.
That's exactly right. And, I hear the term go slow to go fast all the time. I'm like, it makes sense in its paradoxical nature, but sometimes you have to go fast to go fast. Sometimes you have to take things slow because it requires that. We've been dealing with the problem of segregation in schools since their inception.
Right, exactly. And in 1954 didn't all of a sudden change anything, really.
No,
right?
No.
So I guess what I hear you saying, though, is it's one thing to say to go slow to go fast. It can be an excuse if you're not committed to where you want to be. Absolutely. And so many of us last so little time in the jobs we've been given and the charge that we've been given that we believe that we got to go fast because we may not be here. In the end, what was something that was good that came out of the situation?
The classes were detract. I had to compromise with establishing a clear path for students to be able to maintain their pathway to more rigorous courses in high school. Because the issue was the middle school. It wasn't the high school. And one of the things that I compromised on was this particular school district did not offer weighted grades at the high school for AP. So one of the things I compromised on was to offer weighted grades for AP so that a student could get a 4.5 or a 5.0, if you will. But that the decision to offer the weighted grades did show parents that I cared about all of their students, that I cared not only about offering support for struggling students, I offered support for students who needed extra support or needed more rigor. And so that, it was being a more well-rounded educator, being a more well-rounded leader, that I wasn't just trying to take something away from the students who wanted rigor to provide to all the students who didn't do well.
Our guest today was Dr. Aaron Johnson, Associate Superintendent, Professor at Wayne State University, and the author of A Walk in Their Kicks, I highly recommend everybody check out this book because while so many talk about making positive change within a district, I think you give really important next steps for any one of us who really want a more just society for all. So you started off by saying this was a love letter, your book. I think that you continue to write these love letters in all of your actions and everything that you do. What an honor to know you and meet you today.
Thank you, Peter. It's been my honor to be invited to be on your podcast, and I wish you all the luck in the world to continuing this and having this spread across the nation as educators are trying to improve their school environment.
So I've been getting some questions about how, following each of the conversations that I have with guests, that I come back with Jamie Almanzan and we talk about what did we hear, what did we learn, what are some things that we're thinking about. The whole idea here is that what we're trying to do is to create a thought partner for our listeners. Many of them are superintendents who are driving from work to work, long distances between meetings. And this gives an opportunity for the leaders to have almost someone alongside them saying, well, this is something I was thinking about, or this is something I heard. It just elevates and highlights parts of the conversation, almost essentially so that it sticks. And so let's bring back Jamie. And we're going to have a conversation. I think where we left off was he wanted to talk a little bit about the after action review. So I think that's where we'll start. So Jamie, what was it that was on your mind about the after action review?
In that truly back to John Lewis once again, right? He got into, in his mind, good trouble. What he believed to be morally right. And as soon as he did it, he caused trouble. But he realized the need that being morally right isn't enough. You actually have to do this together, do this with people.
Absolutely, you do. You really do have to do it with people because otherwise they will wait you out and then they'll return to like, well, thank God he's gone. We don't have to do that anymore, do we? No, let's get back to tracking.
Yeah. I'm interested to know, given that this is my friend, and actually nothing surprised me from what he had to say. I mean, there are a couple of things that like I said, I really like that phrase that he did for An Imperfect Leader. I've got another one that I really want to talk about. But what resonated for you? What stood out in your mind as someone who got to meet him for the first time? I guess actually, can I ask a more simple question to start? I mean, you and I are getting to know each other. I consider you my friend. I'm really enjoying you.
Me too.
And do you see why Aaron's mine, my friend?
Absolutely, because you are willing to say things that I often am thinking, but am a little bit more reserved about saying out loud because I've been conditioned as a superintendent to be a little bit more political.
Yeah. And
so to your question about Aaron, I thought about him quite a bit this week, particularly in the last 24 hours. And in fact, in preparing for our conversation, because I have been collecting how school districts are preparing for schools to no longer be considered safe places when it comes to immigration rates. And so I've been talking to friends in New York and in the Midwest, in Illinois, in Southern California, in the Washington, D.C. area, in Kansas and in Missouri, and asking them, what are your plans? What are you going to do? And that's because I've been contacted by a few districts to say, what did you do the last time schools were faced with this type of concern? And last time schools were very clearly considered safe places. And now they're being told they're not. And so I thought to myself, how would Aaron handle this? How will he handle this? What advice would we be giving as well? And so at any rate, I thought to myself, here's a person who during our conversation spoke so clearly about humanizing students and valuing their voices. And we're going to be asked to balance or weigh their humanity and their voices when potentially government agencies invade your school for the sole purpose of dehumanizing them and silencing their voices. Yikes. How could you have an answer?
There's not one. I can only think of what does it Stephen Pruitt have to say about how to handle the shooting at a school. Like they had a plan. They had the intervention that went once it happened. And then they actually spent time. What he realized he missed was the repair.
So I think that's interesting because although that conversation had to have been in my head, because immediately I started asking school leaders to consider, okay, look, you're going to have these plans in place, everything from person comes to your school and you're going to ask them for their ID, and then you're going to ask to see a warrant, and then you're going to say, I need you to wait here, and I'm going to call legal counsel, and I'm going to figure out what are my options. And you know what? You should know, unless the warrant says something, I'm calling the parent to let them know that you're here at the school asking to talk to their child. You know, I'm going to do all these different things. That's a plan. And I then started to think about, what about after the event? How do we even plan for that? That's the recovery piece. And I started to think about, while we're going to state emphatically, clearly, I don't even know what the right term is, but we're going to make sure that we say, we highly recommend you avoid getting involved or well, I'm going to just look at what my language was, because basically we want you to stay out of it. Like, don't physically impede an official. And at the same time, we should prepare for the fact that in so many of our school environments, the reason why we got into it was to be fierce advocates for kids. And so you should expect that there's going to be an adult who's going to zip tie themselves to a child, say like, you're taking the kid, you're taking me, So also have a plan for just the basic stuff. Who's going to supervise that class now? What are the community funds that are available to post this guy's bail or this person's bail? I mean, I was just trying to think through all the different things that I would have to think about as a superintendent. So,
what I went through, what I thought of, and I thought of this with a colleague of mine in Oregon who's starting to put together a plan. We were thinking about compiling a list of people that are safe for the kid to be pick up the kid if their parent doesn't show up to pick them up.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it might even be worth reviewing with families, who is your emergency contact? Just be really clear.
Yes. Be ready.
That's a really good piece of advice. Anyway, I thought it was appropriate to bring up. This is what I was thinking about. I'm so glad we talked with Aaron Johnson, because I got the sense that he's the kind of leader who is thinking about these types of things and honoring voice and humanizing children and their families. I'd feel so good about sending my child to his school district, knowing that he can't predict everything that's going to happen, but I do think his default is to do right by kids.
The truth. I'm so grateful. So grateful. The thing that I thought was really interesting, I'd be wondering what you mentioned it. You really, I think it resonated with you, was the mirror metaphor that he used.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that the full-length mirror in his house that makes him look so good as he walks out. There's a part of me that was like, that's good. I need to get one of those, because confidence as you walk out the door is helpful, right? Very helpful.
Yes. However, right? What does he say?
Exactly.
However, he says, and so, where I choose to look, where I choose to get my information matters. I have to go to the people. I have to ask them. So, similar to making sure that you're getting information that you need to hear, not what you simply want to hear.
Because if that's the only mirror you have, then you actually never, it's like you never know for sure. There's never a counter. And so there's some things that, like, you'll miss simply because you never looked anywhere else. There's nothing wrong with having a mirror that gives you confidence, but I should probably have a mirror that also has a different light, that shows, I don't know, it's picking something small, like I shaved and I clearly missed a spot, or
exactly.
I clearly have a booger hanging out of my nose.
Oh, yeah. Well, and he says, here it was Aaron out there up front saying, this is what we're doing. No discussion. That's not even my personality, is what he said, which I believe.
Yeah.
He just said, but I knew that this was going to be a hard decision. And so this is in response to when I asked him, so what got overlooked? He said, so what got overlooked was like going out to the community and having discussions and asking questions and allowing what came from the community to help drive my decision, to help drive the decision that the team had. And yeah, I didn't understand until it came back to bite me, that I didn't understand until there were people organizing in the community to make this go away, that their child should have access to all these classes. He said, yeah, what they're trying to do is limit my kids' college access. And that's not what we were trying to do. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it was really, really powerful.
But he had a bunch of one type of mirror. He didn't care. He was looking at the one thing. And that, I think we fall into that trap as leaders, because I'm afraid that people are going to tell me no. And that they're not going to give the opportunity, et cetera. That was great. That was a really powerful one. Did you have one other idea that came out from the podcast that you thought was the interview that you thought was really interesting?
I was reinvigorated by Aaron's approach to, sometimes referred to as like bibliotherapy, using literature to teach concepts and to engage students. Lots of people do focus groups with kids and they ask them questions and things like that. And I think to some extent you get information. I could imagine choosing a story that centers around a school environment and then having conversations and asking, how is this like our school? How is this different from our district? What have your experiences been like? Do you have similar experiences to this protagonist? And you heard me talk about it. I did that when I was an elementary school principal. I didn't even think about doing it at a district level. We did some book studies with teachers. How cool that would have been to have done a book study with students and really harvest their wisdom in a way and use literature as that vehicle to do it. My gosh, you get so much from students. And I thought, we need to be doing that more. Aaron is brilliant. Let's do more of that.
Isn't that amazing?
Well, I think people probably really left this conversation energized and ready to take on the world, particularly with the world once again being turned upside down. So, Jamie, I cannot wait to see you next week.
Peter, I look forward to seeing you too.
You've been listening to An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast.
Music for An Imperfect Leader was written and arranged by Ian Varley. Sam Falbo created our artwork, a wood print inspired Daruma doll butterfly. Remember, imperfect leadership is not a scarlet letter. It's a badge of honor. It recognizes that serving as a lead learner is about being a vulnerable leader, an empathetic leader, a compassionate leader. We are proud to be imperfect leaders, so join us next time for another episode of An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast.